I lost one of my best friends today. To explain, I've always been a fan of Pokemon, more specifically the first and second generations. I remember my first team perfectly. I usually had 3 optional Pokemon for various TMs, cut, whatever you want to call them. But I always had Pups, my Arcanine, Bruce, my Hitmonchan, little funny joke, you get it, it's good, and most importantly, my level 76 Pikachu, Sparky. We spent hours together battling gym leaders, capturing wild Pokemon, and even beating the Elite Four. You could say that Sparky was my first real friend. I mean, you have to understand, I spent the larger portion of my childhood on a farm. Pokemon was my escape from the world. And not to mention, I was just your average blonde-headed kid. It was all I had, and once I got a Nintendo 64, I started to get into other kinds of games. I left my friend behind. A few years ago, on a particularly icy day in November, I decided to brush off the old Nintendo 64 and play some of the old games. As I opened the box, I was first greeted by the Game Boy to Nintendo 64 adapter for Pokemon Stadium. Figuring I had no other idea where to start, I decided to look around for my old copy of Pokemon Yellow. I had never imported my Pokemon when I was younger, and the thought of seeing my awesome team in 3D blew my mind. Attaching the cords to the television and the game back to the adapter, my ear twitched at the sound of rain on my window. Yet paying no mind to the weather, I proceeded to turn on the system. Greeted by the familiar title screen, watching it all the way through, the nostalgia came flooding back all at once. Importing and playing went fine. I played for hours with my old team and a few rented Pokemon. Outside, the rain became more violent. Lost twigs and hail ran my windows and house as I played. And when the day was done, I decided to return the Pokemon back to their original game. Exporting them one by one, I chose to transfer Sparky last. The first few went fine and returned to their place in my game. But as I was about to transfer Sparky, the lights flickered and dimmed as the room lies still in darkness. I became very angry at the thought of what may have happened to either of the games, or Sparky. I waited for what must have been an hour before I decided to go to sleep, as I had work in the morning. After work, I returned home exhausted, forgetting I still needed to transfer my beloved Pikachu. I stored the game in the system in the closet. Top shelf, second box from the right. And that's where he lie for years to come. 3 days ago, I decided to pick up Pokemon Yellow again. To my surprise, there was no save file on the game. Confused at this, I read online that my battery was dead and the game was lost. Naturally, I was upset because I had lost my first team and character, Jack. But Sparky might still be on Pokemon Stadium. I grabbed the Nintendo 64 and connected it as quickly as I could, checking for my dear friend. And he was there. Sparky made it. I quickly transferred him to another cartridge that still had some life in it, and traded him to a friend. After a while, we finally got the battery replaced and moved Sparky back to his own game. It was a bittersweet reunion, as I lacked the badges to use him, and he never listened to me. When I looked at him, I could almost see an expression of sorrow in his face, followed with the text, "Please?" I always kept him at the bottom of my party, even though I could not use him. I began to notice strange things around the game. I mean, these were all minor deviances such as discolored boundary markers or missing text, and I played it off as a consequence of having the battery in the game pack replaced. The one that bothered me the most were the 8 discolored pillars in Pallet Town, all in a line on the east side. I couldn't think of what this might mean though. Probably nothing, to be honest. It always seemed as if the larger the city, the more of these discolored boundary objects I would find. Not to mention the slowdown was awful sometimes, and some of the NPCs were even missing. After I got the appropriate badges, I tried using Sparky. Encountering a wild Pokemon, I was greeted with a familiar cry of my long-lost friend sent into battle. Eradicate! An easy victory, of course. When I selected Thunderbolt, the game paused for a second, and the sound of my Pokemon's cry could be heard. The text below it said nothing. Eradicate attacked with a bite. Sparky flinched. It attacked again. As the damage counted, the text below Sparky read, "Please?" I tried to attack again, this time with a quick attack. The game paused. Again. Finally, the animation started, and Eradicate fainted. Instead of gaining any experience after the battle, the text box simply read, "Please?" I found this a bit strange, so I saved the game and put it down. Could Sparky really be asking me to do something, or was this some elaborate Easter egg by Nintendo? Much like the complaint you get for using a bootlegged copy? Literally, a guide tells you to die if you play a bootlegged version of the game. So, anything's possible, right? 2 days passed and I grew ever more curious about the game. I decided to turn the game back on and see what was going on. The game started right where I had left off. I opened up the menu for Pikachu and interacted with him. He seemed very sad and annoyed, as if we had just met, with the text below reading, "Please." Notably, the text did not read as a question anymore, but a plea. I was curious if there were any other Easter eggs in the game, so I began to talk to the NPCs around the world. After a while, I ended up in Lavender Town. As the screen shifted to light purple, the game lagged for a few frames before loading the buildings and NPCs into the town. After a few steps, the Lavender Town theme began to ring throughout the room. As I talked to the little girl who asked if you believe in ghosts, I said no. To which she replied, "I guess not. That white hand on your shoulder is not real." I knew about this already, so the creepiness was dampened just a bit. However, as this text appeared, I noticed that Sparky began to walk toward the Pokemon Tower. I waited to see what he was doing. As he moved another step towards the tower, I became entranced with the song. Staring at the screen, waiting for something, anything to happen. Finally, I hit A to continue. Nothing happened. A again. Nothing. Finally, I pressed start before mashing all the buttons at once. As I did this, the game finally let me go, and I can't prove it, but I could have sworn the little girl said, "Please?" I shook it off as the game was old, and Pikachu was behind me again, and I decided to follow Sparky's hint and enter the Pokemon Tower. Again, the game paused. But for longer this time. The NPCs loaded in, finally. Talking to them, I heard tales of the ghosts that roamed this tower waiting to be put to rest. Strange, because I had already done this tower. I assume the dialogue doesn't change, and I shrugged it off. Ascending the tower was a very saddening experience. None of the NPCs were present above the first level, and every time I looked at Sparky, he just gave me the same saddened reaction, and the text read, "Please." As I reached the part of the second floor where you fight your rival, to my surprise, I found him standing there. I interacted with him, and he turned to me and said, "You must find what it means to lose." Taking this as a cheesy one-liner before a fight, I chuckled. I pressed A to continue. I was ready. The next set of dialogue read, "Please." No battle started, as my rival turned away. I turned away from my rival and interacted with Pikachu. He held the expression of terror. The next step I took started a battle. As the Lavender Town theme restarted, I saw that it was the ghost. I quickly used the scope to identify it. The game replied, "Now is not the time to use that." I tried to attack, but instead of saying Sparky was too scared, it just said, "Please." The game paused for a while, as the music filled my ears with this haunting melody. I began to ponder what this really meant. Why was the ghost back? What could the discolored objects mean? After a while of thinking, I noticed that I was back in control, and I ran from the battle. The text read, "You got away safely." After the battle, every step I took in making my way out of the tower, I was stopped by the ghost. Finally, I started walking up the tower, and the ghost left me alone. Upon reaching the top floor, I noticed 3 discolored tombstones in the middle of the room, with a sign placed in front of them. As I approached the stones, I interacted with Sparky. His model was unusually dark, and his body was moving. His eyes still peered directly at me. With a press of the A button, I was greeted by the Pikachu's cry, next with the text, "Please!" I turned to the sign and interacted with it. It read, "This is where Pokemon go to die. The last world is over now, and you must find what it means to lose. Please." As I contemplated what this could mean, I turned my attention to the tombstones. The tombstone on the left read Bruce. The tombstone in the middle read Pups. And the final tombstone was blank. As I read the final tombstone, I knew what this all meant. The discolored boundary items were not coincidence. They were tombstones. And everyone was dead. I left the Pokemon Tower with a heavy heart, and as I entered the Pokemon Center, the game paused again for what seemed like forever. The background music had stopped, and the room was silent. I thought about Sparky. I thought about all the Pokemon that I had lost. How lonely he must have been sitting alone for all those years in a foreign game. No NPCs loaded this time. Not even Nurse Joy. I interacted with Sparky one last time. He seemed at ease, but sad. I walked to the PC, selected Release Pokemon, selected Sparky. And with a single press of a button, I set free the last part of a dead Pokemon game. I returned to the tower to find that the NPCs were all back in their proper places. Ascending the tower, I found the 3 gravestones were back to normal too. I did the right thing, right?